Captain Sarah Donovan stood on the tarmac, the hot Nevada sun beating down through the thin veil of clouds. The roar of engines filled the air as jets taxied past, their metal bodies gleaming like silver predators. She adjusted her flight suit, feeling the familiar tightness around her shoulders and chest. Every strap, every buckle, every piece of gear had a story. She had worn them all countless times. Each mission, each flight, was a promise she had made to her country, to herself, and most importantly, to her late brother, Lieutenant Michael Donovan, who had died in Afghanistan 5 years earlier. Michael had been the reason she had joined the Air Force, growing up in rural Kansas. Their childhood had been filled with planes overhead, the distant hum of engines, and the stories of soldiers from their town who had served. Michael had been daring, reckless sometimes, yet always principled. Sarah remembered the day he left for his first deployment. She had hugged him tight, whispering that she would follow him in the skies one day. He had laughed, shaking his head. "Don't worry, little sis. You'll make it." She had. And now, standing on this sun-scorched tarmac, she felt the weight of all those years of training, preparation, and unspoken grief coalesce into the moment before takeoff. Her call sign, Eagle One, was more than just a name. It was a reputation she carried, a symbol of precision, courage, and the rare ability to keep her calm when everyone else around her was panicking. The squadron looked up to her, even the youngest pilots fresh out of flight school. But to Sarah, it wasn't about fame or admiration. It was about duty, about being ready when the moment demanded everything from her. Her eyes swept over the A-10 Thunderbolt parked in front of her, a hulking beast of war, yet elegant in its deadly simplicity. She ran a hand along the fuselage, feeling the cold metal hum with potential energy. This machine, this aircraft, had saved countless lives under her control. Its engines roared when ignited, and it carried the weight of every mission she had flown. The cockpit smelled faintly of oil and heated metal, familiar, comforting even. She climbed in, sliding into the seat as if it had been molded for her alone. Fingers on controls, helmet in place. She ran through her pre-flight checks with the meticulous attention that had saved her, and her teammates on more than one occasion. The hangar doors opened slowly, letting the sunlight spill across the airstrip. Dust swirled as the morning heat rose from the tarmac. Sarah's heart beat in rhythm with the engines, each thrum a reminder of the responsibility she bore. Today's mission wasn't just another patrol over Nevada's vast desert expanse. Orders had come down for deployment overseas, somewhere far beyond the horizon, in a land she had only seen through briefings and satellite images. People's lives would depend on her skill, her speed, her courage. She swallowed, remembering Michael's last letter. The sky isn't just a place to fly, Sarah. It's where you protect those who can't protect themselves. Remember that. Always. She had never forgotten. The other pilots filed past, nodding or offering quiet greetings. There was camaraderie here, but also an unspoken acknowledgement of the dangers ahead. Each of them carried memories of missions that had gone wrong, of comrades lost, of decisions that had weighed on them for years. But Sarah carried hers differently. She let grief sharpen her focus instead of dulling it. She let loss guide her judgment, keeping her cool when chaos erupted. That discipline had earned her the call sign Eagle One. Engines thundered to life around her, vibrating the fuselage beneath her fingers. The ground crew waved, signaling that all systems were operational. Sarah responded with a subtle nod, her visor reflecting the sun like molten silver. She took a deep breath, centering herself. There would be no hesitation, no fear. The mission would demand every ounce of her training, every instinct honed over years in the cockpit. She had flown countless sorties before, but the weight of this deployment pressed differently, heavier, more personal, more urgent. As she taxied down the runway, The landscape of Nevada stretched endlessly around her. Mountains jutted into the sky like jagged teeth, valleys carved by ancient rivers now dry under the relentless sun. It was a place of beauty and danger alike, a stark reminder that even in the vastness of the American desert, vigilance was never optional. Sarah's thoughts briefly drifted back to home, the wide fields of Kansas, the farm where she and Michael had watched planes streak across the horizon, dreaming of adventure and glory. She shook the thought away. Memories were important, but so was the present. Lives depended on her now. With a smooth push on the throttle, the A-10 surged forward. Dust kicked up behind her as the aircraft gained speed, tires rattling over the tarmac. She lifted off with practiced ease, climbing into the clear morning sky. The ground shrank beneath her, mountains and valleys merging into abstract shapes. Clouds drifted lazily at higher altitudes, and the sun cast golden light across the landscape. The roar of engines drowned out everything else, leaving only the hum of her own determination. Sarah adjusted her course, running through the checklist for her first patrol over enemy territory. The communication channels crackled faintly, voices she didn't know passing orders and updates. She responded with calm professionalism, her voice steady, unwavering. Every mission began with uncertainty, but Eagle One thrived in it. This was her element. Up here, above the chaos and dust of the earth, she could see clearly, act decisively, and intervene when others couldn't. She was a guardian, unseen but vital, a shadow in the sky. As the aircraft leveled at cruising altitude, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The deployment ahead would test her in ways Nevada's training grounds never had. But she was ready. She had trained for this, lived for this, and carried with her the memory of her brother, a constant reminder that courage was forged in love, loss, and unwavering resolve. Today, Eagle One would take flight not just as a pilot, but as a protector, a force of precision and judgment in a world teetering on the edge of chaos. Her cum crackled again. The squadron leader's voice was sharp, professional, and precise. All units maintain formation. We're heading into contested airspace. Eyes open. Sarah tightened her grip on the controls, feeling the subtle vibrations of the aircraft responding to her movements. She glanced over the instrument panel, scanning for potential threats. Up here, in the thin air of the upper atmosphere, every second mattered. Every decision carried weight. She welcomed it. The thrill of responsibility, the adrenaline of action, it was as natural to her as breathing. Somewhere beyond the horizon, danger awaited. Lives would hang in the balance. And Captain Sarah Donovan, known to all in the Air Force as Eagle One, was already in the sky, ready to answer the call. The desert sun blazed overhead, merciless and unrelenting. Sergeant Mark Rivera adjusted the straps of his flak vest, sweat running down the back of his neck, sticking his shirt to his skin. Dust swirled in eddies around the convoy as trucks rumbled across the cracked, barren earth. Kandahar province was unforgiving, a place where a misstep could mean death, where silence could be as dangerous as gunfire. Rivera's platoon, 9 soldiers strong, moved with disciplined caution, escorting a convoy of humanitarian aid trucks through a narrow canyon. Each truck carried food, medical supplies, and the fragile hope of survival for villages caught between insurgent forces and war-torn neglect. Rivera's eyes scanned the ridges above. Every shadow seemed alive, shifting with the wind, and every scrape of rock against rock made his hand instinctively hover near his weapon. The valley stretched for miles, but it felt claustrophobic, the cliffs rising like the walls of a cage. He'd seen too many patrols go wrong in similar terrain, too many friends lost, too many bodies left behind to mark the cost of war. The hum of the engines was a constant companion, a reminder that progress came at a price. "Keep your eyes peeled," Rivera murmured, speaking more to himself than to his men. "Don't let them surprise us." Private First Class Luis Ortega, his youngest team member, flinched at every noise, his wide eyes betraying both fear and admiration. He had trained for this, drilled over and over in simulations. But nothing prepared him for the reality of moving through hostile territory with the weight of lives, civilian and soldier alike, pressing down on him. Next to him, Sergeant Tanya Blake adjusted the straps of her rifle, scanning the high ground with practiced precision. Every patrol, every step, demanded attention. Here, one moment of distraction could cost everything. The convoy moved slowly, engines rumbling in careful cadence. Dust clouds rose behind each vehicle, a subtle but unavoidable signal to anyone watching from the ridges. Rivera's mind raced as he monitored the radio chatter. Base updates came in sporadically, fragmented and static-laced. Intelligence reports had warned of increased insurgent activity in the area, small bands lying in wait, using terrain to their advantage. Rivera had hoped the warnings were just that, warnings. Now, every creak of metal, every gust of wind, every distant shadow made him second-guess. Hours passed under the harsh sun. The soldiers traded quiet jokes to mask the tension. Their smiles were fleeting and uneasy. Rivera noted the way Ortega kept glancing at him, as if seeking reassurance that everything would be fine. He wanted to give it, but he didn't even fully believe it himself. The landscape was too perfect for an ambush. Narrow paths, high cliffs, and limited maneuverability. And insurgents knew it better than anyone. Then came the first sign. A rock shifted, small and subtle at first, but enough to trigger instinctive alertness in Rivera. His hand moved to the radio. Eyes up. High ridges. Watch everything. No response came immediately. Only the soft hum of engines and the whisper of the wind. But his gut told him something was wrong. "Sergeant," Blake whispered, her eyes fixed on a distant shadow. "Movement up there. 3, maybe 4. Could be scouts." Rivera squinted, adjusting his position on the back of the lead truck. There, barely visible against the tan rock, figures crouched, blending with the canyon walls. He cursed under his breath. It was exactly as he feared. They'd been spotted. But there was no panic, only disciplined preparation. He raised a hand, signaling the platoon to slow and tighten formation. Every second stretched like a lifetime. The convoy creaked forward cautiously, engines now just enough to maintain momentum without drawing unnecessary attention. Rivera's mind raced through options, fallback positions, exit routes. Every maneuver he drilled countless times now mattered, and one mistake could unravel all of it. Then it happened. The first shot rang out, sharp, metallic, echoing off the cliffs like a warning bell. Bullets tore through the air, kicking up dirt and ricocheting off truck sides. Rivera shouted, "Take cover! Return fire!" Instincts took over. Soldiers dove behind vehicles, rifles raised, adrenaline surging. The calm desert had erupted into chaos in a heartbeat. Ortega's hands shook as he returned fire. Every shot a desperate attempt to suppress attackers he couldn't even see clearly. Blake shouted coordinates to the drivers, guiding the convoy towards slightly safer ground. Rivera's voice cut through the smoke and dust, commanding, calculating, praying. "Hold your position. Keep your heads down." The enemy fire was precise, calculated. It wasn't a random ambush. This was professional, planned. As the bullets tore through the canyon, Rivera realized just how vulnerable they were. Trucks couldn't move fast enough. The cliffs provided perfect cover for hidden shooters, and their radios were patchy at best. Communication with base was critical. They needed air support. But the nearest aircraft were miles away, and every second counted. He grabbed the radio, fingers tight on the controls. His voice cracked slightly. "Command, We're pinned down. We need air support now. Repeat, air support, urgent. Static answered him first, then distant voices. Rivera cursed under his breath, listening to the fragmented chatter. The seconds stretched unbearably. Around him, soldiers fired in short bursts, seeking to suppress enemy fire while keeping the convoy as intact as possible. Smoke and dust filled the air, stinging eyes and choking lungs. Explosions echoed from distant detonations, shaking the ground beneath them. Then, almost impossibly, through the chaos of static and gunfire, came a voice, calm, steady, undeniably confident. Hold your position, Sergeant. I'm already on my way. Rivera froze for a moment. The voice was familiar, not by tone, but by the authority it carried. Experienced, unflinching. Eagle One, it couldn't be. The legend, the pilot who never failed, was already in the sky above them. For a fleeting second, the chaos around him slowed. He could hear nothing but the pounding of his own heart. The desert, the bullets, the fear. It all seemed to fade beneath the knowledge that help was coming from above. He glanced up, scanning the sky for the glint of metal, the shadow of an aircraft. Somewhere far above, a woman was already answering the call before it was fully made. He turned to his men, voice louder, more commanding now. Stay focused. She's here. Keep your heads down, return fire only as needed. We're not out of danger, but help has arrived. The soldiers moved with renewed energy, coordinated and precise, bolstered by the hope that Eagle One was already in the sky. Rivera felt a strange sense of calm despite the chaos. He had seen death, destruction, and despair in these deserts, but he had never witnessed the kind of instant, almost supernatural reassurance that a legend could bring. In the distance, high above the canyon walls, faint contrails began to appear, slicing the blue sky like silver threads. Rivera squinted, shielding his eyes from the sun. A shadow moved rapidly, approaching, swift and deliberate. Relief and adrenaline collided in a single sharp surge. For the first time in the ambush, he allowed himself to hope. They might make it out. The ground may have been trapped, but the skies were watching, and a woman known as Eagle One was already above them, a guardian ready to turn the tide. And as bullets continued to ricochet and the desert screamed with the chaos of battle, Rivera realized one undeniable truth. The moment of salvation had arrived, riding on the wings of a pilot who had already answered the call. The desert sun dipped lower, painting the jagged cliffs in hues of orange and crimson, but the beauty of the landscape belied the danger hidden within. Sergeant Mark Rivera's convoy crawled through the narrow canyon, trucks carrying aid supplies like fragile lifelines. Every rock, every shadow, and every gust of wind seemed alive. His gut tightened as he scanned the ridges above, spotting subtle movements that whispered of an unseen enemy. Eyes up! Rivera barked, his voice cutting through the static-filled radio chatter. Private Ortega froze, then quickly dove behind the nearest truck, rifle ready. Sergeant Blake crouched low, scanning the high ground with practiced precision. Rivera knew the terrain. He had studied every patrol route, memorized the escape paths, calculated the angles of approach and cover. But nothing could prepare him for what was coming. A sudden shift in the wind carried the faint crack of movement, a telltale sign. One rock tumbled down a cliffside, hitting the ground with a dull thunk. It was subtle, almost too easy to miss, but Rivera's instincts screamed. They'd been spotted. Then, without warning, the first shots rang out. Bullets tore through the air, ricocheting off the canyon walls and kicking up plumes of dust. Trucks jolted violently, engines roaring as drivers struggled to maintain control. The ambush had begun. Take cover, Rivera shouted, diving behind the lead vehicle with Ortega and Blake. Explosions erupted around them, the canyon echoing like a drum of destruction. The insurgents had chosen their positions carefully, hidden in the shadows of cliffs, using every ridge and crevice as cover. Their aim was deadly, their timing precise. Rivera's heart pounded as he assessed the situation. They were trapped in a natural corridor, limited in movement, exposed to relentless fire from above. The soldiers responded immediately, training kicking in over fear. Blake returned fire, her shots calculated, targeting the enemy positions she could see. Ortega's hands shook as he fired, trying to suppress attackers with short bursts. But the insurgents were everywhere, invisible yet omnipresent, and every second stretched unbearably. "Sergeant, we're pinned down. We need air support." Rivera's voice cracked over the radio. "Repeat, urgent air support." Static filled the line, then distant voices, fragmented, unclear, responded. Rivera gritted his teeth. Time was slipping away. The convoy could hold its ground for only so long, and every second mattered. He glimpsed an explosion near one of the trucks. Flames licked the metal frame, smoke spiraling into the sky. Civilians screamed, caught in the chaos. Rivera cursed under his breath. Lives were at stake, and they couldn't hold out much longer. He ducked as a hail of bullets grazed the side of the truck, kicking up a cloud of sand and dust. "Hold your position," he yelled, firing his weapon to suppress the enemy. But the insurgents were organized, coordinated, relentless. Each move the platoon made seemed anticipated. The ambush was not random. It was a trap. Through the chaos, Rivera's mind raced. He had trained for this. Every patrol, every simulation, every scenario he had drilled came down to this moment. He had to protect his team, guide the civilians, and survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. But the distance to base was vast, and the radio was intermittent. The canyon amplified every sound, gunfire, shouts, explosions, creating a nightmare of noise and confusion. Then, as bullets tore through the air, a faint, clear voice cut through the chaos. Calm, steady, confident. "Hold your position, Sergeant. I'm already on my way." Rivera froze. The radio crackled in disbelief. His mind struggled to process the words. Eagle One, the pilot he had heard legends of, the woman who had never failed a mission, was already in the air, already responding before he even finished his call. Relief collided with disbelief, and for a fleeting instant, time seemed to slow. Around him, soldiers glanced at each other, uncertainty mixing with hope. Ortega's wide eyes mirrored Rivera's own shock. Blake's jaw tightened, a flicker of awe crossing her face. The ambush was still raging, but a sense of salvation had entered the canyon, invisible, imminent, unstoppable. Rivera grabbed his radio again, voice steadier now. "Copy that. All units, maintain positions. Eagle One is on approach." Above, far beyond the canyon walls, a glint of metal appeared, catching the fading sun. The unmistakable shape of an A-10 Thunderbolt sliced through the sky, engines screaming in defiance of gravity. Eagle One had arrived. The insurgents, hidden and confident moments before, now faced the impossible. From the heavens, a guardian had descended. Rivera barked orders, his voice cutting through fear and adrenaline. "Suppress fire only. Watch your sectors. Stay low and move when I give the signal." His soldiers moved like clockwork, each step precise, each action deliberate. Sarah Donovan, in the cockpit of her A-10, scanned the canyon with pinpoint accuracy. Red blips marked enemy positions on her targeting system. The wind buffeted her craft, but she remained steady, calculating every angle, every approach. Her fingers danced over the controls with practiced precision, adjusting trajectory, altitude, and weapon systems. She knew the stakes. She knew the lives hanging in the balance. And she would not fail. She released the first ordnance, a precise strike that tore through the canyon walls, sending a plume of dust and debris skyward. Bullets from the insurgents ricocheted harmlessly off rock as the platoon below glimpsed the destruction from above. Their savior had arrived. Rivera's breath caught as he watched the first explosions tear through enemy positions. And suddenly, the ambush didn't seem so hopeless. But the enemy wasn't finished. They regrouped quickly, emerging from hidden cover to continue their assault. Rivera yelled for suppressive fire as civilians were guided toward the trucks for cover. The A-10 swooped low again, its guns blazing. Explosions echoed in the canyon, shaking the ground, sending clouds of dust into the air. The insurgents were disoriented, their advantage shattered by the presence of the legendary pilot. Ortega peeked over the truck, eyes wide, whispering, She's real." Blake shook her head, firing at a newly exposed sniper nest, shouting, "Don't take your eyes off her. Move when I tell you." Rivera's heart pounded, yet a sense of calm began to settle over him. Eagle One was here. She was precise, fearless, unstoppable. He allowed himself a brief, almost impossible thought. They might actually survive this. As the A-10 made another pass, strafing enemy positions with lethal precision, Rivera realized the truth that had been whispered in legends but never believed until now. In moments of hopelessness, in the chaos of battle, there was always a guardian ready, unseen, untouchable, above all else. The voice that had answered his call before he even finished speaking was not just a pilot. She was a force of nature, a protector who turned desperation into hope. Through the smoke, sand, and echoing gunfire, Rivera's team began moving in coordinated steps, guided by his commands and the presence of their unseen savior above. Civilians ducked, trucks maneuvered, and soldiers returned fire when necessary. Every movement felt like a dance with death, but for the first time, the music had a rhythm that made survival possible. Rivera took a deep breath, his mind racing through the possibilities of escape, extraction, and survival. He looked up again, catching sight of the contrails of the A-10 weaving above, a silver streak across the fiery sky. Eagle One was already in the sky, already saving them, already turning the tide of battle in ways that words could barely capture. And as bullets tore through the canyon and dust clouds billowed around them, Rivera realized this was not just a rescue. This was a statement. The call for air support had been answered before it was even made. Lives were being saved in real time by the woman who had promised never to fail. And for the first time in the middle of a hellish ambush, he allowed himself to believe that they might see another sunrise. Captain Sarah Donovan's A-10 Thunderbolt roared through the thinning afternoon sky, engines screaming over the desert like a predator closing in on its prey. Dust rose in turbulent swirls from the canyon below, where Sergeant Rivera's platoon had been pinned under relentless enemy fire. Her eyes, sharp behind the visor, scanned the jagged ridges, noting the positions of every shooter, every sniper nest, every hidden trench. Red blips on the targeting system marked hostile positions with terrifying clarity. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself as the roar of the engines reverberated through her body. Lives were at stake, and she was the line between survival and death. The radio crackled in her ear, carrying fragmented panic from below. Rivera's voice broke through. "We're pinned. We need air support now." Sarah's fingers tightened on the throttle. She didn't hesitate. She had already been on patrol, already soaring across this desert sky. When the call came, she had been ready, always ready. "Hold your position, Sergeant," she replied over the comm. "Help is on the way. You won't be alone." Her A-10 dipped, banking sharply over the canyon entrance. From above, she could see the chaos below. Trucks lay scattered, dust and smoke twisting around them. Soldiers huddled behind vehicles, firing into the cliffs, trying to suppress the enemy, but clearly overwhelmed. Civilians were pressed to the earth, screaming, terrified. She felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the fear, the responsibility, the unrelenting pressure of life and death decisions. She thrived in this, but it never became routine. Not for her. Not ever. "Eagle One, you're cleared to engage," crackled the voice of the command center, distant and calm. But she didn't need clearance. Her training, her instincts, and her resolve dictated every action. She had flown countless sorties in life-and-death situations, but nothing compared to this. The canyon funneled sound and fire, magnifying every explosion, every ricochet, every scream. She clenched her jaw. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. Her first strike run was calculated and precise. The A-10 dove low, the guns unleashing a deafening roar as rounds shredded the rock face and insurgent positions. Explosions erupted like miniature suns along the ridges, sending plumes of dust and debris into the air. Below, the soldiers looked up, faces illuminated by the hellfire raining from above. Rivera's eyes widened. They had heard tales of Eagle One, but seeing her in action, in real time, in their moment of desperation, was almost surreal. Sarah adjusted her trajectory, firing again, strafing enemy lines with the precision that had earned her the call sign. Each pass was a ballet of destruction, each second a calculated dance with fate. She coordinated with Rivera over the comm, guiding the platoon's movements while neutralizing threats above and below. Her voice was calm, unwavering, a lifeline in the chaos. "Move left, Sergeant. Watch the flank. I've got the ridge covered," she instructed as bullets kicked up sand around the vehicles. Rivera obeyed, moving his men along the narrow canyon floor. Civilians scrambled toward the trucks, guided by the steady commands of the platoon and the invisible shield of the A-10 above them. The insurgents tried to regroup, but Sarah anticipated every move. She banked sharply, engines roaring, unleashing a salvo of rockets with terrifying precision. One sniper nest was obliterated, a series of explosions erupting simultaneously along the cliff face. Another hidden position fired at the trucks, only to be torn apart moments later by her next run. She coordinated strikes and movements seamlessly, communicating constantly with Rivera, ensuring no friendly fire or unnecessary risk. Time became a blur. Each pass over the canyon, each shot, each maneuver was a test of nerve, skill, and endurance. Her hands ached from the controls. Her mind raced at 1,000 thoughts per second. And yet, she remained calm, focused, relentless. She had trained for this, lived for this, and now every second counted more than her own life. From the ground, Rivera's platoon watched as the tide of battle began to shift. Their pinned positions were opening. The enemy was faltering under the relentless assault from above. Soldiers who had been frozen with fear now moved with purpose, guided by Sarah's precise instructions and devastating firepower. Rivera felt a rare surge of hope. The impossible had arrived. Then came the hit. A sharp explosion rocked the A-10, throwing Sarah against her harness. Smoke and warning lights filled the cockpit. The enemy had fired at her aircraft, striking the left wing. Red alarms screamed at her, but she didn't hesitate. "Not yet," she muttered, her hands steady on the controls. Another pass, another calculated strike. The canyon erupted with sand and debris as insurgent positions crumbled. Lives below were being saved, but the price of proximity to danger was mounting. She felt the vibrations of the aircraft falter, the shudder of damage running through the fuselage. The engines coughed but held. Sarah's mind raced, calculating risk versus reward. One more pass could break the enemy's hold completely. but it could also mean catastrophe for her. She pushed the thought aside. Lives were more important than fear. Eagle One didn't hesitate. "Sergeant, keep moving to the trucks. Clear the civilians," she instructed, pulling the throttle back slightly as she prepared for a final strike run. Explosions erupted along the ridges as she unleashed the last of her ordnance. The insurgents, disoriented and decimated, scrambled for cover. The canyon floor, once a death trap, became a path of opportunity, a route to survival under the protective firestorm raining from above. Rivera's team finally began to advance. The convoy reformed, trucks moving with coordinated precision, civilians shepherded safely under the guidance of their platoon. Each step was a step closer to escape, and each step owed its life to the woman in the sky. Rivera couldn't help but feel a profound awe. The legends had spoken of her skill, her bravery, her precision. But this, seeing it unfold in real time, was beyond comprehension. Sarah made one final pass, firing her last rounds with pinpoint accuracy. The canyon fell silent, the insurgents either eliminated or fleeing in disarray. The dust hung heavy in the air, and the roar of her engines reverberated off the walls like thunder. The platoon below emerged from cover, battered but alive. Rivera allowed himself a moment to breathe, his chest heavy with exhaustion and relief. "Eagle One," he muttered under his breath, staring upward, "you really are already in the sky." Sarah's A-10 banked high above, engines screaming in the dying light. Her wings glinted in the sunset, a silver beacon of hope and precision. She had achieved what no one else could in moments of desperation. Every soldier below owed their life to her presence, every movement coordinated by her unmatched skill and courage. But the battle was not yet fully over. Sarah knew the aircraft had taken damage. The shuddering vibrations warned her that the next move required caution. She pushed the thought aside for now, prioritizing the safety of those on the ground. Her mission had always been clear: protect, defend, survive. She had accomplished the first two. Survival was next. For Rivera and his platoon, the desert echoed with the aftermath of destruction and salvation. They regrouped, eyes straining skyward, hearts racing. The sound of engines fading in the distance left an imprint on their memory, a reminder that courage sometimes came from places unseen. Sarah Donovan, Eagle One, had arrived before the call, acted before it was asked, and had turned the tide of battle with the precision of a guardian angel. And as the canyon settled into a tense calm, the soldiers began to understand the truth that would stay with them forever. Sometimes, heroes don't wait for orders. Sometimes, they are already in the sky. The dust and smoke swirled through the canyon like a living thing, carrying with it the stench of gunpowder and fear. Sergeant Rivera's platoon pressed on, adrenaline sustaining them as the insurgents fell back, disrupted and disoriented by the relentless air assault. But Sarah Donovan, Eagle One, wasn't finished. From high above, her A-10 Thunderbolt roared over the jagged cliffs, engines vibrating with the power of precise destruction. Every movement was deliberate, every burst of fire calculated to neutralize threats without harming the civilians below. The roar of her guns cut through the canyon like thunder, and the ground shook beneath the echo of explosions. Her hands moved with practiced precision, operating the throttle, targeting systems, and weapons simultaneously. Red markers flashed across her HUD, tracking enemy positions, identifying pockets of resistance. She adjusted her flight path, banking sharply over the canyon walls, ensuring her line of fire remained true. Each pass she made shredded insurgent fortifications, leaving behind clouds of dust, crumbling rock, and the faint cries of retreating fighters. Sergeant Rivera moved the convoy slightly to the left. Civilians first, vehicles second. Sarah's voice crackled over the cone. Calm, commanding, and unwavering, It anchored the platoon amid the chaos. Rivera barked the orders down the line, soldiers maneuvering with renewed focus, trusting every word from the woman above. The impossible had been made possible. They were surviving against overwhelming odds, because someone else had already risked everything for them. But even as she guided the convoy, a sharp alarm blinked on her console. Enemy fire had found her, a volley of small arms rounds pinging off the A-10's reinforced armor. Smoke trailed from the left wing. Warning lights flashed red across her HUD. Damage sustained, the system warned, yet her focus didn't waver. She had faced worse. She had survived worse. Lives were at stake, and she wouldn't abandon them. "Eagle One, you're hit. Pull back," came a voice over the comm from the command center. "Negative," Sarah replied firmly, teeth gritted behind her visor. "Not until they're clear. Hold your positions." She banked lower, engines screaming as she dove into the heart of the canyon. Her aircraft shuddered violently, warning lights blaring, alarms screaming, but she ignored them. One more pass, one more strike, and the platoon would have a clear path. She released ordnance, the A-10 roaring in defiance as rockets slammed into enemy positions. Explosions rippled along the ridges, sending insurgents scattering. The canyon floor was a chaos of sand, smoke, and desperate movement, but Sarah's precise strikes created a corridor, a lifeline through death. Below, Rivera's platoon moved cautiously but decisively. Private Ortega's hands trembled as he fired into exposed enemy positions, every movement guided by Sarah's commands. Sergeant Blake's rifle barked in rapid succession, clearing a sniper nest that had pinned them moments before. Civilians stumbled behind trucks, their fear palpable, but they were protected, shielded by the aerial storm above. The insurgents attempted to regroup, firing indiscriminately, trying to reclaim control. One sniper, hidden in a crevice, took aim at a truck carrying supplies. Sarah saw the flash, the muzzle, the trajectory, and reacted instinctively. She leveled the A-10, unleashing a strafing run that obliterated the position. The explosion sent rocks tumbling down the cliffside, narrowly missing the convoy below. Her focus remained unbroken, but the damage to her aircraft worsened. Smoke trailed from the left engine, flames licking the metal. The vibrations through the fuselage were alarming, and the HUD now showed critical system warnings. The aircraft's armor held, just barely, but another hit could be catastrophic. Yet she didn't hesitate. One final pass, one final salvo, and the insurgent resistance was decimated. The canyon, once a death trap, now offered a path of escape. Rivera's convoy advanced cautiously, guided by her commands, moving through the chaos toward safety. The soldiers exchanged glances of disbelief and awe, realizing the impossible. They had survived because one woman in the sky had refused to yield. But then came a sharp jolt, unlike anything before. The left wing, battered and smoking, flared as the aircraft shook violently. Alarms screamed, warning lights pulsed frantically. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls, muscles taut, mind calculating options at lightning speed. Ejecting now would save her life, but leaving the convoy exposed would be unacceptable. She made her choice in a heartbeat. Just one more pass. She leveled the aircraft again, targeting the last pockets of enemy fighters. Rockets slammed into entrenched positions, machine guns roared, and the canyon erupted in dust, smoke, and fire. The insurgents fled in confusion and terror, their advantage obliterated. The platoon below surged forward, reaching safer terrain as civilians scrambled behind trucks in protective formations. Sarah felt the aircraft shudder violently as a final volley struck the A-10. The left engine coughed, flames licking its hull. The fuselage screamed in protest, metal groaning under the stress. She gritted her teeth, and pulled the throttle back, fighting to maintain control. The canyon was clear. The convoy was safe. Lives had been preserved. Her mission, at least for now, was complete. She activated the ejection sequence, knowing the aircraft could no longer sustain flight. The canopy slid back, and she was thrust into the sky, the wind slamming against her body as she separated from the craft. Free-falling, parachute deploying in a rush of air and adrenaline, she scanned the canyon below. The convoy was moving, soldiers covering civilians, the threat neutralized. Relief mixed with exhaustion as she floated gently to the desert floor, landing in the sand, scraping but alive. Rivera's eyes widened as he spotted the parachute descending. She made it, he shouted, rushing toward her with the platoon. Private Ortega stumbled, tripping over rocks, but his face was alight with relief. Blake kept an eye on the ridges, still wary of any hidden insurgents, but the battle had shifted irreversibly. Eagle One was on the ground, alive, and they owed everything to her. Sarah pulled off her helmet, sweat and sand clinging to her face. She looked at the platoon, their expressions a mix of exhaustion, awe, and gratitude. Her voice, though hoarse from the adrenaline and exertion, carried the same calm authority that had guided them through the canyon. Move to the trucks. Stay covered. I'll watch. Rivera reached her side, panting, hand extended. Captain, you saved us. All of us. You. Sarah shook her head, brushing sand from her flight suit. We did it together, she said quietly. Stay focused. We're not completely clear yet. Above, the A-10 lay smoking in the canyon, a testament to the ferocity of battle and the razor-thin line between life and death. The insurgents, scattered and demoralized, had fled to regroup elsewhere. The canyon was littered with debris, the scent of scorched earth and spent ordnance hanging in the air. But the platoon was intact. Civilians were safe. And for this moment, survival had won. Rivera looked at Sarah, admiration and disbelief etched into his features. I've heard the stories about you, Captain, but I never imagined this. Sarah offered a faint smile, brushing her hand across her face. Stories are for when you tell them later. Right now, we move. The soldiers began gathering around her, moving toward their trucks with cautious determination. Each step was heavy with exhaustion, each movement fueled by the knowledge that they had survived a battle that should have claimed them. Rivera's eyes swept the canyon one last time, tracing the path of destruction that had been both terrifying and miraculous. And somewhere above, the echo of engines and gunfire lingered in memory. Eagle One had arrived before the call, struck with precision and courage, and preserved lives in a way that would be remembered long after the canyon had returned to its quiet, desolate state. Sarah collapsed onto the sand briefly, letting the weight of adrenaline and exhaustion wash over her. She knew the aircraft was likely unsalvageable, but it didn't matter. The mission was a success. Lives had been saved. And in the desert heat, among dust and echoes of gunfire, she allowed herself the briefest flicker of satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that more challenges awaited in the days to come. The battle was won, but the war continued. And Eagle One, already in the sky, had proven that courage, precision, and determination could turn the tide even in the darkest moments. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast sea of sand, rock, and sun-bleached earth, silent now, except for the distant wind whispering through the canyon. Sergeant Mark Rivera's platoon had regrouped, keeping civilians close to the trucks as they navigated toward safer terrain. Dust still hung in the air from the explosions and gunfire that had turned the canyon into a battlefield, a reminder of how close death had loomed. Yet amidst this fragile peace, all eyes searched for one figure, Captain Sarah Donovan, Eagle One, the guardian who had descended from the sky and turned hopelessness into salvation. Sarah lay on the sand, her flight suit scorched and torn, sweat and dust clinging to her face and hair. Her breathing was heavy, each inhalation sharp with exhaustion and adrenaline. She could feel the bruises forming across her ribs, her back aching from the violent maneuvers of the damaged A-10. The parachute had saved her life, but the landing had left her scraped and bleeding, every muscle screaming in protest. She pushed herself upright, scanning the canyon below for remaining threats, refusing to let fatigue claim her focus. "Captain!" Rivera shouted, rushing toward her. His boots kicked up clouds of sand as he reached her side. "Are you okay?" "You're hurt." Sarah shook her head, a faint, exhausted smile on her lips. "I'll survive." "Let's focus on them first," she said, gesturing to the civilians and her platoon. Her voice was hoarse but steady, carrying the authority that had guided them through the ambush. Rivera glanced at the trucks, ensuring everyone was accounted for, and then nodded, understanding that Eagle One's priority was always others before herself. The soldiers began moving cautiously, scanning the cliffs for any stragglers or insurgents attempting to regroup. Blake and Ortega stayed close, offering support to Sarah as she walked toward the convoy. Each step was deliberate, controlled, but the pain radiated through her body. She ignored it. There was no room for weakness here, not until every life in her care was safe. Above them, a plume of smoke rose from the A-10, marking the site where the aircraft had crashed during the last assault. The once proud war machine now lay battered and broken, a testament to the ferocity of the battle and the near-impossible odds Sarah had faced. Rivera's eyes followed the plume, a mix of awe and concern in his gaze. "She took everything for us," he muttered, almost to himself. Everything. The canyon remained eerily silent now, the echoes of gunfire and explosions fading into memory. Yet the danger was far from over. Insurgent reinforcements could be on the move, and the desert offered few natural protections. Rivera and Sarah knew they had to move quickly to ensure safety for the civilians and regroup with allied forces. The trucks started rolling again, engines low to avoid drawing attention, each soldier alert to the slightest noise or movement. Sarah leaned against one of the trucks for support, assessing the platoon and civilians. Her mind raced through the events that had unfolded in the past hour. The precision strikes, the destruction of enemy positions, the sheer adrenaline of guiding a convoy through a canyon under constant fire. She had flown the A-10 like an extension of herself, every maneuver calculated, every decision life or death. And now, faced with the aftermath, the weight of what she had risked pressed heavily upon her. "Captain," Rivera said softly, kneeling beside her, "you saved us. We owe you everything. But you can't keep doing this to yourself. You can't keep risking your life like that." Sarah looked at him, exhaustion in her eyes, yet determination burning beneath. "I know the risks, Sergeant," she replied. "But someone has to be in the sky. Someone has to answer before the call is fully made. That's what it means to be Eagle One." Her words carried a weight Rivera had seen before, in soldiers who bore responsibility beyond their years. She was not boastful or reckless. She was principled, driven by an unyielding commitment to protect. Rivera's respect for her deepened further. He knew he had seen legends in stories, but he had witnessed one in flesh, sweat, and fire, and she had carried them all through a battlefield. The convoy finally reached a flat, open area where they could regroup safely. Trucks parked in a rough semicircle, civilians guided to the center, soldiers taking positions around them. Sarah assessed the group, checking for injuries. Minor cuts, bruises, and shock were evident, but everyone had survived. Relief washed over her briefly, mingled with fatigue and pain. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to sit in the sand and let the adrenaline ebb. Then Rivera approached, holding a small first aid kit. "We need to patch you up," he said firmly. "You've taken a beating. You can't do this alone." Sarah nodded, allowing him to tend to her bruises and scrapes. As he worked, she kept scanning the surrounding desert, her instincts unwilling to rest. Every soldier, every civilian, every inch of the terrain was a potential threat. She had learned long ago that complacency in war was deadly. Rivera applied antiseptic to a gash on her arm. "You're amazing," he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone do what you just did. I don't even know how to describe it." Sarah offered a small, tired smile. "I just did what needed to be done," she said simply. "Focus on them first. That's all that matters." The sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the desert. The beauty of the sunset clashed with the destruction and chaos of the canyon below. Sarah stood, brushing sand from her flight suit, feeling the ache of every muscle. She looked toward the distant horizon, already calculating the next steps, the extraction point, and the safest route for the convoy. Even in exhaustion, she could not stop thinking, planning, guiding. Then the radio crackled, the familiar static-filled voice of command filtering through. "Captain Donovan, status report. Are you and the convoy secure?" Sarah adjusted her headset, replying firmly. "We're secure for now. Civilians accounted for. Enemy neutralized. Some damage sustained, but we're moving to extraction." "Understood," came the calm voice. "Extraction team en route. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes. Hold position. 15 minutes. It was enough to feel human, enough to catch a breath, but short enough to maintain vigilance. Sarah allowed herself a rare, fleeting glance at the canyon. The destruction, the dust, and the echoes of the battle would remain in memory forever. She had flown into death, fought chaos, and preserved life. And yet, the war was far from over. Rivera approached again, his tone lighter now, a hint of admiration mixed with relief. "You've got a way of turning the impossible into the possible, Captain. You don't just fly. You make miracles happen." Sarah shook her head, brushing sand from her hair. "Miracles don't exist in the sky, Sergeant. Only action, skill, and the willingness to take the risk." As they waited for extraction, the platoon moved around, tending to civilians, checking supplies, and securing the area. Sarah leaned against a truck, scanning the horizon one last time before allowing herself to sit. The sun dipped further, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Pain throbbed through her body, but pride and relief intermingled. The platoon, civilians, and even the canyon itself had survived the storm of bullets and fire because someone had dared to rise before the call was even made. Her eyes closed briefly, savoring the fleeting calm. This was the price of bravery, pain, fatigue, and unrelenting responsibility. But it was a price she was willing to pay. Because when lives hung in the balance, when chaos threatened to overwhelm, there was only one thing that mattered, doing everything possible to save them. Above, the wind shifted, carrying the faint echoes of what had transpired. The battle in the canyon had ended, but the memory of fire, courage, and survival would linger forever. Sarah Donovan, Eagle One, had paid her dues in sweat and risk, yet she remained unbroken, ready to answer the next call, the next mission. And as the distant hum of helicopters signaled the approaching extraction, Rivera and the platoon gathered around her, eyes wide with gratitude, awe, and something else, a deep understanding of the legend they had just witnessed in real life. She was not just a pilot. She was a force, a guardian. And she had already been in the sky, answering a call that others hadn't even made yet. The distant hum of rotor blades cut through the desert air, a sound that had never felt so sweet to Sergeant Mark Rivera and his platoon. Dust spiraled upward from the approaching helicopters, kicked up by the powerful rotors, filling the air with a gritty haze. Civilians clutched each other tightly, eyes wide with both fear and relief. Soldiers moved with a mix of exhaustion and urgency, ensuring every person was accounted for. The ambush was over, the insurgents driven off, and yet the adrenaline still thrummed through every muscle. Captain Sarah Donovan, Eagle One, stood near the lead truck, her flight suit scorched and dust-streaked, sweat mixing with sand on her face. Every step still hurt, but her posture remained steady and commanding. She had led them through hell, guiding the convoy under fire, neutralizing enemy positions, and now she was ensuring the extraction went smoothly. She scanned the horizon, noting the landing zones, assessing potential threats, and coordinating with the incoming helicopters. Even in exhaustion, her mind refused to rest. "Platoon, assemble near the trucks. Civilians first," she ordered, her voice cutting through the wind and rotor wash. Rivera moved quickly to organize his men, checking that everyone had survived. No one was left behind. Private Ortega, shaking slightly from exhaustion, nodded, helping guide civilians to the designated zones. Sergeant Blake kept a vigilant eye on the surrounding cliffs, scanning for any late-arriving insurgents. The desert was quiet, but Sarah knew the silence could be deceptive. The first helicopter descended carefully, skimming the canyon floor, its landing skids kicking up clouds of dust. The second followed, bringing with it a renewed sense of hope. Soldiers moved with practiced precision, directing civilians and ensuring the wounded were helped onto the aircraft. Rivera moved to assist, glancing back at Sarah. She gave a small nod, silently acknowledging the teamwork that had carried them through the ambush. Sarah approached the first helicopter, helping a child into the cabin, then assisting an elderly woman. Each person she helped carried the weight of her determination, her unyielding commitment to preserve life. Rivera watched, awe and gratitude written across his face. He had heard stories of Eagle One, of her skill and courage, but seeing her in action, moving among civilians, ensuring their safety after facing death herself, was something else entirely. "Captain Donovan, the last of the civilians are aboard," Rivera reported. "We can move out." Sarah glanced at him, nodding. "Good, let's keep it tight. Watch the flanks. The insurgents may regroup, and we can't let our guard down until we're clear." The helicopters lifted smoothly, rising above the canyon. Dust and sand swirled beneath them, like ghostly reminders of the battle that had just ended. The convoy followed, vehicles moving in careful formation, soldiers maintaining perimeter security. Sarah watched from the ground for a final moment, ensuring everyone was accounted for. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, but she pushed it aside. Mission success demanded vigilance until every life was safely out of the danger zone. As the last vehicle cleared the canyon, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe. She slumped slightly against the truck, her muscles screaming from the strain, her body bruised from the parachute landing and the aerial maneuvers she had performed. Rivera came to her side again, offering a hand. "You've done it, Captain. Everyone's safe. You saved all of us." Sarah shook her head, exhausted but resolute. "We all did it, Sergeant. I just made sure we had a path to get through." Her voice was soft, almost humble, but it carried the weight of someone who had faced death and chaos and emerged victorious through determination and skill. The helicopters hovered, signaling the next phase of extraction. Soldiers loaded into the aircraft, civilians secured in the cabins, and the wounded carefully assisted onto stretchers. Sarah moved among them, ensuring everyone was safely aboard. Rivera watched as she directed movements with precision, her voice clear and commanding despite fatigue. Every decision mattered. Every second counted. Once the last soldier and civilian were on board, Sarah finally stepped back, giving a last sweep of the canyon. Smoke still lingered from the destroyed I-10, evidence of the firestorm she had wrought from above. The insurgents had been defeated, their ambush rendered futile by her skill and bravery. Rivera stood beside her, silent for a moment, watching the dust settle. "Captain," he said finally, voice filled with awe, "I don't think any of us will ever forget this. You didn't just fly. You changed the outcome. You saved lives that might have been lost forever." Sarah allowed herself a faint smile, brushing dust from her uniform. "That's why I fly, Sergeant. Someone has to be ready before the call comes. Someone has to answer before it's even made. That's all." The helicopters lifted smoothly, carrying civilians, soldiers, and their rescuers out of the canyon. Sarah stayed behind a moment longer, watching the rising dust, the canyon walls that had witnessed both death and salvation. The weight of the mission settled on her shoulders, bruises, fatigue, and the lingering adrenaline reminding her of the risks she had faced. Yet, beneath it all, there was satisfaction. Lives had been saved. The impossible had been made possible. Rivera's platoon gathered near her, exhausted but alive. Blake approached, her expression a mix of gratitude and awe. "Captain Donovan, I can't even begin to describe what you've done," she said quietly. "We owe you everything." Sarah shook her head. "You've done what mattered too. You kept your team together, protected civilians, and followed through even when the odds were against you. I just made sure the sky was on your side." The extraction team had now fully arrived. Soldiers and civilians climbed aboard, the helicopters rising into the sky, carrying them to safety. Sarah finally allowed herself to take a step back, to rest, to breathe. She looked up at the canyon one last time, the smoke and dust now fading into the desert haze. The battle had ended, the threat neutralized, and the people she had saved were now out of harm's way. Rivera approached once more, his voice low and serious. "Captain, I don't know how to thank you. You risked everything for us, for complete strangers. You've earned every story that's ever been told about Eagle One." Sarah's gaze softened. "You don't need to thank me, Sergeant. Just remember this. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about acting despite the fear, making the choice to protect others, even when it costs you everything." As the helicopters carried the convoy away from the canyon, Sarah finally allowed herself to sit, exhausted, letting the adrenaline drain from her body. She looked toward the horizon, the sun dipping low, painting the desert in fiery golds and crimson reds. The canyon, once a scene of chaos and death, now stood as a testament to survival, bravery, and the extraordinary impact one person could have. Rivera, Blake, Ortega, and the rest of the platoon gathered near her, silence enveloping them. There were no words that could capture the magnitude of what had just occurred. They had survived an ambush that should have claimed their lives, guided and protected by a legend who had already been in the sky before the call was even made. And as Sarah looked at them, battered but alive, she felt the weight of both relief and responsibility. The battle was over, but the war continued. There would always be more missions, more danger, more calls for courage. But in that moment, the canyon was theirs. The people were safe, and the legend of Eagle One had been cemented in the hearts and minds of those she had saved. She exhaled deeply, letting the desert wind carry away the remnants of tension, pain, and fear. For now, the mission was complete. And the soldiers, civilians, and even the canyon itself would remember the day when a woman in the sky answered a call that hadn't even been fully made and turned it into survival, hope, and life. The desert sun had almost disappeared behind the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. Dust still hung in the air from the chaos of battle, mixing with the golden light to create a surreal, almost otherworldly atmosphere. Sergeant Mark Rivera and his platoon gathered near the extraction point, their faces still streaked with sweat, dirt, and grime. Civilians huddled in trucks, exhausted and shaken, yet alive, a fragile testament to survival against impossible odds. Captain Sarah Donovan, Eagle 1, sat quietly against a boulder, her flight suit torn and scorched from the ordeal. Her eyes, though weary, reflected calm determination and quiet pride. She had done her job. She had risked everything for lives that were not hers to protect, and yet, as always, she had succeeded. Around her, the platoon and civilians sensed a presence beyond ordinary human courage, a force of skill, resolve, and unyielding bravery that had shaped their fate in the canyon. Rivera approached, offering a hand to help her to her feet. "Captain, you did more than save us," he said, voice hushed, almost reverent. You changed the outcome of that entire battle. You've earned a place in every story we'll ever tell about this day." Sarah shook her head lightly, brushing sand from her hair. "I just did my job, Sergeant. You and your men followed through, protected civilians, and kept the convoy together. That's just as important." Blake stepped forward, her eyes reflecting the awe she felt. "Captain Donovan, I've heard stories about Eagle 1, but seeing you in action, it's beyond anything I imagined. You didn't just fly. You were everywhere, and yet somehow, you were always ahead, always one step before danger." Sarah offered a faint smile. "That's the point. Someone has to be in the sky before the call comes. Someone has to act when others can only react. That's what I do." The helicopters hovered nearby, rotor blades slicing through the thickening evening air. Soldiers and civilians were already boarding, guided carefully by Rivera and his team. Sarah took a moment to scan the canyon one last time, letting her eyes trace the path of destruction and survival that had unfolded over the last few hours. The once deadly corridor of rocks and ridges had become a corridor of life, made possible by coordinated courage and decisive action. As the last civilians and soldiers boarded, Sarah's thoughts turned inward. The price of bravery had been high. The A-10 was destroyed, her body battered, her adrenaline spent, but the reward was clear: lives preserved. She knew the war was far from over. There would be more calls, more danger, and more moments demanding everything she could give. Yet in this quiet moment, she allowed herself a flicker of satisfaction. She had fulfilled her duty, and that mattered. The helicopters lifted smoothly, carrying everyone toward safety. Rivera and his platoon waved, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and gratitude. Sarah remained behind for a moment, letting her gaze drift over the canyon. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and scorched earth, a reminder of the ferocity of the battle and the thin line between life and death. She had flown into chaos, guided the unprepared, and turned despair into survival. As the helicopters receded into the distance, she finally allowed herself to lean back, exhausted, letting the cool desert wind wash over her. Her thoughts drifted to the stories she had heard before joining the Air Force, tales of courage, sacrifice, and skill that had inspired generations. Now she realized something profound. Stories were not just told after the fact. They were lived, moment by moment, in decisions made under fire, in risks taken when no one else could act. Rivera approached again, this time with a notebook in hand. "Captain Donovan, if you don't mind, I want to make sure this gets recorded. Every detail, every moment. People need to know what happened here today. People need to know what you did." Sarah shook her head with a faint, weary smile. "Sergeant, it doesn't matter if people know. The important thing is they survived. That's the story worth telling." "But the story can inspire others," Rivera insisted. "It can teach them courage, the importance of readiness, and the power of skill and determination. What you did, it's legendary. Sarah's gaze softened. Legends are dangerous things. They create expectations. But if my actions today inspire someone else to act when it matters most, then maybe there is value in it. The desert settled into a hushed calm as evening deepened. Stars began to emerge, pinpricks of light against the deepening blue sky. Sarah looked upward, her thoughts briefly lifting to the heavens she had commanded from above, tracing the path of her, a 10 through the canyon, through fire and chaos. She had been in the sky before the call, answered before the question, and guided lives through danger. That alone was enough. Rivera approached one final time, a mix of admiration and humility in his expression. Captain Donovan, thank you. Not just for what you did, but for showing us what courage really looks like. I don't think anyone here will ever forget it. Sarah nodded silently, allowing the moment to settle. She had risked everything, yet her mind already turned to the next mission, the next call. That was her nature. That was her duty. But for now, in the quiet aftermath, she allowed herself a small measure of peace. Lives had been saved. The canyon had survived. And the legend of Eagle One had been etched not just into the annals of military history, but into the hearts of those who had lived to tell the tale. As she finally boarded the last helicopter, lifting off from the desert floor, Sarah cast a last glance toward the canyon. The shadows stretched long across the sand, the ridges now silent witnesses to courage, sacrifice, and skill. She allowed herself a rare smile, knowing that the battle was won, the lives were safe, and the legacy of the sky would endure. Rivera and his platoon watched as the helicopter disappeared into the night. She's incredible, Blake murmured, almost to herself. I don't think anyone can ever forget her. No, Rivera agreed. She's more than incredible. She's Eagle One, and she was already in the sky before we even knew we needed her. As the stars filled the desert sky, the canyon remained silent, yet alive with the memory of courage and survival. The civilians, now safe, would speak of this day with gratitude and awe. Soldiers would recount the story in hushed tones around campfires and briefings, a tale of heroism that seemed almost unbelievable. And in every retelling, Captain Sarah Donovan would be the central figure, a force of courage, precision, and unyielding resolve. Her name would endure. Her story would inspire. And the legacy of the sky, of Eagle One, would live on in every heart she had saved, every soldier she had guided, and every civilian who had seen survival rise from the brink of annihilation. The desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the echoes of gunfire, explosions, and voices of those who had survived. And somewhere above, the sky remained vast, eternal, and untouchable, a reminder that courage, when wielded with skill and purpose, could change the course of fate itself. Captain Sarah Donovan, Eagle One, had answered the call before it was even made. And in doing so, she had left a legacy that would soar far beyond the canyon, far beyond the desert, and far beyond the imagination of those who heard her story. For those who witnessed it, and those who would hear it later, the lesson was clear. Heroes are not born. They rise, and sometimes they are already in the sky.